Broadcast is started, sir.
Okay. Shall we start?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, hello. May I audible to all?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Hi, everybody, and namaskar. That is that is the in the period of Corona we use namaskar to everyone to greet you. This is my proud privilege to welcome all of you. Uh, this is the 24th author talk in the series that Global Library used to organize. And the purpose is bringing the user closer to the libraries to participate in such talks. And the place I am sitting is used for that purpose. And this is the first virtual talk uh, of this series. And Dr. Nigan Pao is the part of that. So we welcome him. And formal welcome will be given by the library directors. Let me introduce library director, Mr. B.P. Chauhan. He has 40 years of experience to manage the estate of art. He managed different university libraries. He's working as a library director in OP Jindal Global University since 2009. He had worked as a university librarian at Thapar University, Patiala, former assistant librarian at British Council Library, uh, former Fulbright visiting scholar at Virginia Tech. So I hand over to Sir. Kindly welcome to all our speakers, as well as audience and authors. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sanjay, and good morning to everyone. I'm the host for today's program, and it is my proud privilege to welcome, first of all, the author of the book, The Politics of South China Sea Disputes, our own Dr. Nagin Pao Kipgen. This is the third time that we are hosting him as an author, and the first time in a virtual author's talk. Then we have a very distinguished panel of experts who will be commenting about the book and talking on the subject itself, presenting their point of view on the dispute itself and the subject. And we have Dr. Carl Thayer from University of New South Wales on Australia. Welcome, Dr. Thayer. To the event. Then we have Dr. Thor Tan Hai, Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of Vietnam in India. I extend very warm welcome to you, Dr. Hai. Then we have next speaker, Ramil C Banaloy. Dr. Banaloy is a professional lecturer at Department of International Studies, Miriam College, the Philippines. And we have then Dr. Jagannath P. Panda, who is a research fellow and at the Center Coordinator for East Asia at Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi. So I welcome you, all the panelists, to this event, and hopefully we'll listen to their point of view from their country's point of view, and also, from the perspective of the Indian interest in the South China Sea disputes. With that, I invite Dr. Kipken to talk about his book. Is that okay, Sanjay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Of course, good afternoon to Kar and as well as my friend Romel. It's afternoon for them, and it's a privilege. It's a really, we had just a few weeks ago, we had the book launch of this title. It was launched by the Justice Antonio Carpio from the Philippine Supreme Court, and we had a very interesting discussion. And the topic is such important and significant international politics and geopolitics that we are organizing again this another round of book discussion. And I would like to say thank you so much to the Gender University Library staff, starting from its director, Budhi, as well as the senior manager and my friend Sanjay for organizing and putting this together. Before I go on to the book, I would like to take a few moments to pay my humble respect to Professor Eileen Bavaria of University of the Philippines. She was one of the leading scholars in Southeast Asia, in fact, in the studies of China, and of course the South China Sea dispute. She was one of the figures when I visited Philippines a few years ago while writing this book. She helped me not just for the interview. In fact, if you look at the book itself, toward the end of the book, you would find her picture and me printed in the book. And she was very instrumental in putting together a talk at her center, Asian Center at the University of the Philippines. And in fact, I am so sorry to mention this one, but I did not know that she passed away. I remember that her husband passed away last year, but I didn't know that she passed away in March. I came to know only after. In fact, I invited her for this book discussion, not knowing that she passed away. I mean, that's a mistake in my part. But after not hearing from her through email, WhatsApp, and messages, I started asking friends, and that I was told that she passed away in March because of COVID-19 pandemic after returning from Paris. So again, I would like to remember her and say thank you to her, and also wish her soul to rest in peace. So just that's the greater respect that I would like to give at this moment in front of the audience and listeners around the world. Usually, I don't want to talk too much about the book myself since I'm the author, because I would rather love to hear from others, what they say, whether it's a positive, negative, critical, and so on and so forth. Anyway, since I'm the author, I would like to spend a few minutes, I would say, talking about some of the critical areas, or some of the important areas that I think are important to share with the audience and with the speakers before they give their own perceptions or their perspectives about the book. This book, I think one of the key, let's say, significant or important of this book, I would say, is the methodology and sources of data. In fact, I visited 3 different countries, Singapore, Philippines, Indonesia, for ethnographic study, or maybe, let's put it, to conduct interviews with people who are over 40 people, experts. Some of them are in the government, some of them are think tanks and academia, and they are giving, these people are, some of them are directly or indirectly involved in the South China Sea dispute. It's not just based on secondary data or literature, but it's based on primary sources, which gives more weightage to the argument on the analysis of the book or the issue. And also, now I would like to say a few words about the organization of the book itself. The book has 7 chapters, including its introduction and the conclusion. And I just would like to highlight a few important points from each chapter. In the introduction chapter discusses the significance and objectives of the study, laid out research questions and hypotheses, and the methodology and sources of data. And I also analyze theoretical debates on how governments and international institutions or organizations see international disputes through the lens of established international relations theories, particularly realism, liberalism, and constructivism. And I also look at or analyze the ASEAN way of dispute management and dispute settlement under international law. This is primarily which is written or analyzed in the introduction. So in the first chapter 1, I would say chapter 1, I look at the general overview of the South China Sea disputes from ancient times to the present day. The present day, meaning until 2017 or so, without specifically focusing on any single claimant state. Based on the interviews I had, and the chapter elaborates on what is considered to be the fundamental issue of the South China Sea dispute. I think all of you are, in fact, except Dr. Thor Tan Hai, I think I have met and have personally had conversation with the other speakers. In fact, Dr. Hai himself is an eminent scholar on the South China Sea dispute. So here I talk to different scholars, government officials, and think tanks, people from think tanks, and even people who are directly involved or who are directly or indirectly affected by the South China Sea dispute have different opinions or different views about the fundamental issue of the South China Sea dispute. Some people say it's about resources. Some people say it's about geopolitics. And some people say it's about, China. And some people say it's about the relations, individual relations between these claimant states. So I hope to hear from the speakers and what they see and how they answer. And chapter 2 examines China's claim and activities in the South China Sea since ancient times to the present, as I said, 2 years ago until 2-3 years ago. And it discusses the claim and activities of the People's Republic of China, including its artificial island buildings and the ramifications, and its bilateral engagement with other claimant states and with ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And based on the interview, the chapter attempts to answer what precisely is China's claim in the South China Sea. And then also the chapter analyzes why China is not forcibly occupying the South China Sea, given its unparalleled military and economic power. And in chapter 3, I look at it tries to understand the claims and activities of other claimant states other than China, which includes Taiwan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei, as well as the efforts and challenges of ASEAN as a collective body. And based on the interview, I try to address questions such as whether the Philippines and Vietnam are much more vocal on the South China Sea disputes than other claimants. And if so, why are other claimant states relatively silent? And then also try to address whether the ASEAN claimants will eventually abandon their individual claims in exchange for aid and other economic assistance from China, and whether all claimants would eventually agree to resolve the dispute through bilateral agreement, which Beijing has been insisting upon. And I also analyzed the position of Indonesia with respect to the South China Sea dispute, despite being a non-active claimant state. And I also examine in this chapter the initiatives taken by ASEAN over the years, starting from the 2002 DOC to the 2017 Code of Conduct, COC. And in chapter 4, I examine the circumstances and events leading up to the July 2016 arbitration and its effects, both positive and negative. I analyze the positions and arguments of both the Philippines and China before and after the arbitration. I also try to incorporate the responses from my interviewees on the questions such as why did the Philippines decide to pursue the case through arbitration when it was evident that China would not accept or cooperate with it? And given the arbitrary ruling in favor of the Philippines, why did other claimant states do not pursue the same route? Then coming to chapter 5, in chapter 5 tries to understand the role of US, United States, and other countries, which are not direct claimants in the South China Sea dispute. The role of the US, which basically demands freedom of navigation and overflight, is emphasized as some of the claimant states see it as the only country that can balance China. Some say that the role of the United States is necessary as a power balancer, particularly to deter China. Then if so, should the US play a more active role? If so, how? The chapter also examines the role of other neighboring naval powers, such as India, Australia, and Japan in the context of the Quad formation. And of course, in the conclusion chapter, I summarize the major points of the book and discusses the linkage of IR theories and ASEAN way with my research findings, and I try to attempt to theorize it. And I also discussed the way forward in the South China Sea dispute. Same China is seemingly not interested. This is my one of my conclusions. Same China is seemingly not interested in resolving the South China Sea dispute through international law, such as the UNCLOS. What is the best possible solution to the problem? Based on existing literature and the research findings, the conclusion presents the author's own analysis and analysis of the problem and its future prospects. Finally, what I'm trying to put here in the conclusion is, with regard to theorization, because there are several, but I'm not going to touch upon, just one more point here I would like to discuss. My hypothesis is that claimant states are likely to accept an agreement when the application of international mechanisms serves their individual interests more than the common interest. The research, however, the research shows that while there is certain truth to the hypothesis, it does not fully explain the entire problem. One important reason why international organizations or institutions fail to deliver a mutually acceptable solution despite the endorsement by many states is due to lack of or the absence of enforcement mechanism in the international institutions to ensure its effective implementation. In the South China Sea dispute, China's unparalleled economic and military powers have given it the advantage to ignore or disregard the interests of other claimant states, and even to the extent of refusing to apply the call for multilateralism or to respect international law. The COC, the Code of Conduct, if successfully agreed and implemented, can be a temporary solution for activities such as joint initiatives, exploration, environmental protection, sharing of resources, and so forth. But the big question, but it is unlikely to resolve the sovereignty claims of its claimant state. Then the question is whether China will eventually reach bilateral agreement with all the claimant states, either through persuasion or coercion, or will the regional security alliance such as the Quad play an important role on the issue, or at least deter China's increasing assertiveness? Or will the US decide to intervene more aggressively in the future? These are some inherently important but difficult questions to answer with certainty. So having said this, I would like to end by saying that not just me, but people who I have discussed, who I have talked to, interviewed, whether it's from the government or the academia or other scholars, none of them are positive about a solution in the South China Sea dispute in the near future. They say even if there's an agreement reached with the COC, the Code of Conduct, it's going to be just a temporary one for managing the dispute rather than finding a permanent or a long-lasting solution. So I think I share view with these many of my interviewees on this point, and I do not see, unfortunately, what we call a permanent or a long-lasting solution in the near future. Having said that, I would like to end my contribution, or maybe my discussion of the book there. Again, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone again, starting from Professor Carr, Hai, and Ramil and Jagannath for being with us at this important discussion. And I hope this discussion doesn't end here, and we would take this forward. And I would love to hear and looking forward to your, let's say, perspective and your feedback and how we should move forward with this important topic in the coming months and years to come. Thank you very much for being on board, and I would love to hear from you all. Thank you. Back to you, Sanjay.
Now I'd like to invite Dr. Carol to comment on these books and what left, so Dr. Nigan Pao can cover it in the next editions. I read some of the chapters, and it's a well-researched book. They have mentioned that law of sea also. And so the law students may be also interested, not the international affairs students. So how the international law is working. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I wasn't exactly sure what I should do, but I do have some remarks. But I really want to start out by saying, given the vast library of publications on the South China Sea, this particular volume makes an original contribution by providing a succinct, and that's 130 pages of analysis, a succinct overview of the major developments and key political issues of the dispute. It's has an impressive selective bibliography that reflects the spectrum, scholarly spectrum of writing on the subject, and I went through it. And one feature that I particularly liked was at the end of each chapter, there are really good, very short, concise summaries. Now, Ning Pao has already mentioned that he conducted over 40 interviews. That was, but we do have to face that he was unable to go to Vietnam and China because of finance. There were plenty of scholars. I think in 2009, Vietnam began the long march, which are now over 11 international conferences on the South China Sea. So Vietnam, and Dr. Hai is an example of one of many Vietnam scholars that have emerged. I did look at the bibliography, and the Vietnamese view is represented, but that was really an unfortunate thing, because having gone, I think for my bio for today, to 75 conferences on the South China Sea since 2009 in 20 different countries, you get to know who the specialists are. I also like the weaving in of realism, liberalism, constructivism, and the ASEAN way, international law at the beginning and the end, because I think that Amitav Acharya is a good friend of mine, and it's eclecticism, borrow from any that helps explain what's going on itself. Now, let me go through chapter by chapter very briefly, but the general overview of the disputes, a real tough question to ask when you read the summary and the analysis that was provided, giving the key turning points. I'm choosing my words carefully. What were the political entities in the pre-colonial area? We tend to use the word state, Malaysia, when it was a bunch of sultanates. The Philippines was never a modern nation state. And depending, you had Funan, an empire in the south of Vietnam. You had the Chams, Champa, a seafaring people in central Vietnam. And many scholars sometimes argue that Vietnam has lost a bit by not claiming their maritime heritage as part of its own. But the Viet people and the Chams fought bitter wars for a period of time before that. Missing was Solheim. There were a maritime people in Southeast Asia not wedded to states that he applied the name of Lu Santao. And it makes me think of white settlers coming to Australia and saying, the land is unoccupied, it's ours, because a written language like Chinese and a civilization like Europe trumps the indigenous people. And now in this day, that's a horrible thing to say, and we couldn't say it. And so we have a mixture of pre-colonial entities where, when China claims they discovered all these features, flies in the face of their catamarans that skipped across the South China Sea in visited places, and pre-existing entities have passed into history to be absorbed into modern states. But then that raises a question whether China and Vietnam should not be seen as different, that they both have claim to a long-standing, thousands of years, civilization that merged with state identity. From Vietnam's case in the first millennium this time. And does that change the character of its exploration and activities? In in the book, there is proper allusion to Vietnamese claims from the 16th, the 18th century and beyond, but it misses, Vietnamese scholars would have helped you, and this is an area I'd like to see them be more detailed, that when Vietnam was divided and warring between North and South, the Nguyen lords, who later triumphed and set up the Nguyen dynasty in the 19th century, commissioned annual fleets known as the Doi Hoang Sa, the Hoang Sa Brigade, to go out to the Paracel Islands for 6 months. Now, these it says it was annually, but there were interruptions, and they were to pick up marine species and things, but also the cannons and money of grounded Western ships. And temples were built, lighthouses were built, and then the Bakhai explored the Spratlys. And I'm not making a case for Vietnam's thing, but in other words, neither modern day, the Philippines or Malaysia way back then, or Brunei could do these things, but Vietnam was emerging as a state, and therefore it has a different experience. Likewise with China. But if we had Bill Hayton with us today, he would say he can't find any Chinese claims until after 1946 to the South China Sea that we're seeing today. But anyway, that gets me into chapter 2. And I love Nigan Pao's summary that appears several times. China documents its claims with folklore, myths, legends, and history. And it makes no distinction when we're talking about Chinese between hegemonic influence, tributary relations, servantry, and actual control. And I think that's top notch. Those two summarize what we get in Chinese presentations. Backing up the 9-dash line initially, which was always ambiguous, it was 11. What happened to it? And the US State Department found in its series, Limits of the Seas, that looking at the Chinese 9-dash line maps since they were first issued in 48, the lines kept changing on the maps. So they weren't God-given, and they got closer and closer to the claimants' coasts. And Bill Hayton, if he were here, would say a lot of the Chinese claims are based on mistranslations in the 1930s and hyper-nationalism, such that you have a reef in the south with a Chinese name, which is a transliteration of James Shoal, that was called a sandbank, and China claims it is its furthest land feature when it's 20 meters underwater. And then James. I didn't know that China was a Christian civilization. Why would that piece have it there? But historic waters is key. And I think you missed a point when you give us a long history of the Law of the Sea Convention. China advocated historic rights there, but it wasn't accepted. And so therefore, and then you raised a wonderful question, why hasn't China used force? You do give two examples, and they're singular, January 74, March 88, and end up with salami sightseeing, but that's there. When you look at other claimant states, what I want to do is praise you again for the detailed accounts on Taiwan. The only time you find Taiwan mentioned is if you get invited to a conference there and it comes into a book. Generally, it's neglected because of your conundrum of the one China policy, what happens when it's all subsumed under another. And as today's COVID tell us, and it's an argument I've been making before, we can't have a black hole in the region to deal with pandemics or restoring the fisheries in that way. So that's excellent because there are practical ways. And I'll just throw out for argument, Taiwan could be involved in helping restore the fish catch, which has been depleted, through APEC, through an APEC committee, because economies are represented. On the Philippines, you talk about proximity, but you never mentioned Thomas Cloma, an individual citizen who went out and founded Kalayaan, Freedom Land, occupied, unoccupied features in the Philippines that later the government of the Philippines under Marcos took away from him. An interesting one, and to hope to provoke Hai, was Vietnam's occupation of Malaysia's Zamboanga Cay in this kind of period, and how that, because what you do mention, that we have disputes among ASEAN countries as well as with ASEAN claimants in China, and some of them are unresolved. And how can you move ahead with a code of conduct if you can't solve these other ones? Arbitral Tribunal Award, an excellent summary. My nitpicking point, and you both have it right, but sometimes in the writing, the Permanent Court of Arbitration was a registry, as you say. In fact, the Permanent Court of Arbitration is not a court. It's a building, and it's a service facility. And disputants can only avail themselves of it when they get together and both agree to put their arbitration there, and they select the judges. And none of this happened in the present case. So I'm fighting a losing battle with the media, particularly here in Australia, that says the Permanent Court of Arbitration made the decision. You rightly use arbitral tribunal, but I would say that I think among our group, we all know the Permanent Court was it was the administrative center, and everything went out on its stationary because the arbitral tribunal under UNCLOS is ad hoc. So it starts out with no staff, no library, nothing, and it just used that. Correctly point out that Scarborough Shoal was the turning point, that the Philippines had been in bilateral negotiations with China through this period, and the occupation of Scarborough Shoal, a brief compromise to withdraw both ships, then all of a sudden China returned. And then the summary of the interviews at the end of that chapter was excellent. So I really, I'm getting to the end because I don't want to take up, but where you have been overtaken when you deal with the US, yes, you rightly point out, it's a non-signatory. It wants to be referee and player, is what the Chinese would say. Should it play a more active role? Well, Pompeo has spoken. An anti-China alliance of free states to do regime change against the Communist Party of China. We'll have to see where that goes. Intriguing about the Quad, because since you wrote, it has been extended to include New Zealand, South Korea, and Vietnam, but only to deal with COVID. Could it move in other areas? You raise the Quad, and that's interesting because in that discussion that we're finding members of the Quad, Australia, Japan, working with France in the South Pacific. And so that opens up there. Conclusions are wonderful, and then you give a long list that I don't want to repeat, but you go back to your theoretical debate, you go back to the ASEAN way, and then as you did in your summary today, weigh the code of conduct. Now, the one disappointment I have is that I was leaked the copy of the single draft South China Sea negotiating text, and I timed it explicitly when I heard from Singapore the ministers had approved it, and what I had been given was the right copy to press a button so the diplomat produced the summary. But that article wasn't cited. But in other words, it's 2018 and you're moving to the end of the book, because in that, the way forward, and to sort of answer your questions, I have a laundry list and I don't have them written in front, but it doesn't define the geographic scope. And the diplomats tell me that it's the southern part of the South China Sea. And this is not the paracels. And that takes us back to a fact that I know is that there were codes of conduct exchanged in March 2000 between ASEAN and China. I have copies. I was with Pacific Command in those days. They're 2.5 pages long, and they couldn't agree on the geographic scope. They can't agree on enforcement mechanisms. They can't agree on the legal status. Vietnam has suggested the national assemblies, parliaments of each country ratify it, deposit it with the ASEAN Secretary General, who would then deposit it with the UN. The role of third parties is excluded. There's no mention. So even to enforce it or to get the support of those other countries, India, Japan, US, what do they do when the code of conduct comes out? Because China's approach is more exclusionary. And then I will end, when we're looking at the way forward, that the state counselor and foreign minister Wang Yi on the 5th of March gave a major interview, mainly responding to the US, but on the South China Sea, he directly appealed to ASEAN to clear the disturbances and restart negotiations on the code of conduct. And ASEAN will have to pick that up. But then the ASEAN most recent statement around that, within days, to me set out the case for ASEAN centrality, that they're not going to be drawn into Pompeo's anti-China crusade, and neither are they going to work with China to the exclusion of its other dialogue partners, also including the United States. So the ball is back in ASEAN's court with 100 and some odd days of Vietnam leadership left as ASEAN chair. And none of the joint working group meetings were held this year because of COVID. So I leave it there, that there's a pregnant moment where ASEAN, I think, is trying to say, and it keeps stressing multilateralism. In other words, it's got to be through an ASEAN-led mechanism. It referred to a statement issued by the East Asia Summit on mutually beneficial relations. So I think we can see that ASEAN is not grasping, but it's trying to basically say, you guys have got your approaches and you're pressuring us. Here's our response. Pick up on it, because you both can be included. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Carl. I think he has given very extensive critical commentary on the book's content itself.
The criticism was minor.
Yes. And would you like to respond quickly, Dr. Kiplian, before I invite the next speaker?
Yeah.
Raised by him.
Sure. A few things I cannot respond every details, but a few points. I think before Carl came on board, I had some informal conversation with Dr. Hai, and I said one of the reasons why I did not go to Vietnam. In fact, I wanted to visit all claimant states, including China and Taiwan. Of course, depending on what political ideology you have, Taiwan on the issue. But in fact, I wanted to visit all the claimant states. But one reason was that I contacted the Vietnamese embassy in New Delhi. Somebody was supposed to help me go there, but he eventually did not give me any names or any contact person. So, and that's one reason. The other reason was I could not cover other claimant states because I did not have enough financial resources. So that were the two reasons I would have to, excuse myself for that. And of course, Carl is no doubt, he's one of the foremost leading scholar on the South China Sea dispute. I mean, I would have interviewed him, but definitely he is cited in many places throughout the book. So there's no doubt about that. And thank you very much, Carl, for pointing out. Because always positive feedback is not enough. So sometimes we need some critical feedback for future research. And regarding your comment on the COC and your the 2018 that COC that you talk about, by the time the book was already in the final stage, and I could not go back and put more data. In fact, the book was delayed because largely because of the pandemic. But the writing itself had been finished a long time ago. So therefore, I was unable to accommodate or incorporate many of the recent developments, including the COC itself. And of course, Taiwan, let's say, deliberately include Taiwan as a separate claimant state here. As you said, rightly pointed out, Vietnam is not mentioned as a separate entity or independent entity or a sovereign entity when it comes to South China Sea dispute, because the international community, including all the claimant states, do not recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. Therefore, it always misses out in the picture. But I intentionally put there in the picture so that we can understand how the whole South China Sea dispute originally started with this Taiwan, what we call 11 dash line. Then which day we talk about the 9 dash line thing. And I think the historical development was discussed in the book. I think pretty much it. I don't know, Carl, if there's anything that you would want me to respond to, but I thought those are some of the ones that I should respond. Is there anything that you would like me to respond?
I would just reiterate that this makes an original contribution by providing a succinct overview of the major developments and key political issues. This is a turning point, one whole book doing the politics, covering all the bases succinctly. Take the little bits for what they're worth, that any student, particularly at the beginning, would benefit by reading this book from 130 pages. And I'm not denigrating. It's hard to get pack that in, but I had to read it on an iPad and I'm not used to it. And every time I touched the corner of my screen, it would zip to other pages and I was getting very frustrated, but it riveted me. So I want that to be the main takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you. All right, back to you, Buddy. Buddy, you need to turn on your speaker. Sanjay, please inform him. He needs to turn on the speaker.
Both, yeah, Sanjay and Budi are both off. Their microphones are off.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Let me introduce the next speaker, Dr. Thor Tan Hai. He is the Deputy Chief of Mission at Embassy of Vietnam in India. He was previously a Senior Fellow and Assistant Director General at East Sea Institute at the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam. His previous positions include vacation scholar at the University of New South Wales, at the Australian Defence Force Academy in Canberra, and Deputy Director of the Centre for Political and Security Studies of the DAB Institute for Foreign Policy and Strategic Studies in Hanoi. He obtained his doctorate from Australian National University. He has authored himself 2 books on this dispute, on the subject. So we look forward to his views on not only from the Vietnamese perspective, but also general perspective from IR point of view. So welcome, Dr. Hai, and I invite you to speak on the subject.
Many thanks, Mr. Johan and Mr. Chair. And to begin with, I have to admit that I'm speaking now on the capacity of the normal readers. It's not about the Deputy Chief the Mission here in New Delhi, but I think that I'm a researcher about the South China Sea issue, and I'm very interested in the book. And I would like to echo Carl on congratulations on the author, Dr. Yigen Bao Kiken, for that very terrific contribution. I mean, it's an oratorial contribution to, just 1 minute, right? Sorry, someone knocked on the door, so I have to answer. I just reiterate that I would like to congratulate on the author for that terrific contribution to the scholarship on the South China Sea. And I really enjoy reading the book. And overall, I think that it touches on many very important issues in the South China Sea. Particularly, we see how the history involved and also the dispute had been made. And especially, I also enjoyed the reading about the chapter on China that specifically pointed out, how the 9-line China claim is ambiguous, and how the China assertive action actually create a lot of issue on the ground for other claimants as well. And also enjoyed the discussion about the claims of other Southeast Asian claimants, also about Taiwan as a party to the dispute, also how ASEAN stuck, how ASEAN doesn't work in that case. And I think that is, the book is, so it could be a good point of reference for the scholars and students of the South China Sea dispute, so the regional politics, because I think it provides a lot of sources there over there, as the author have very extensively engaged with the scholar in the region, the people who know about the South China Sea, Carl here, and also by many scholars that I know. I think that they are all very reliable, and also they're very leading research on the field. And I think that by engaging a wide range of scholars, that could be provide different perspective on that. There's only one thing pity, that you could not go to Vietnam and China, and I think that could also cause some kind of the gaps in the scholarship, in the way that the China is the biggest claimant and also the most powerful claimant, and of course China's influence in the region. I think from my perspective, China hold the key, how to turn up and turn down the tension in the South China Sea. If you look into the history in the way, and of course, Vietnam also major claimant, as Khan mentioned, that it's quite be an active claimants for quite a while. And of course, that many things I like, and also even though you put the IR theories on that, the realism, the liberalism, and so constructivisms, that they try to examine the issue from the theoretical point of view. But of course, I enjoy it, but also that a point of debate, and also that here is my very first point, really getting to I try to be critical, because it's not the point that I'm from from Vietnam, other thing. But one thing about the how to theaterize, you know, the dispute, how to understand it. I think that the level of the national relations, the systemic level, is not enough. So the many issues that we have to look into the domestic politics of other country, especially in the case of Vietnam, China, and also somehow the Philippines, and even the Malaysia, understand that how the South China Sea could be linked to the domestic politics, which in Vietnam, case of Vietnam, is very important. Basically, of course, is a point of further research on that. I mean, so the interaction, the nexus between the domestic and international is very important there. And of course, a conclusion, I like it very much, but I will save it for the later point. I will go to, you know, also some chapter. Also, I echo many points that Khan also mentioned. I mean, in the history part of that, I mean, the chapter 1, I think it's very important. I mean, you set up, you know, how the dispute have been made and of course how it evolved over time. And of course, it's where we have the limited space and you could not mention everything. So I understood that, but also I echo, you know, the point Khan made, you know, that also the case is not the pre-colonials. Also, they have virus of active players in the region, and at that time, when the South China is not belong to anyone, and of course. But when you look into history, the critical date is important. So usually you mentioned the starting point, the date is about, the year is about 1977. It's a British claim over the Spratly, some features of Spratly, but the Vietnam case as the feudal state, the Nguyen dynasty, I mean that the first state authority state claim is about 1816. So I mean quite further ahead on that other claim in the region. Of course, when the French came and colonized the country, the French, I mean, it's the French who decide on whether to take over the claim or not. And of course, it took over the claim in the 1990s, when of course in 1930s, it also had a lot of quarrel with China on the part. So I think that that the case of Vietnam, because of it not be mentioned on that, so it can be can be compensated in some way or another. And I think that when we look into history, also it's better to explain how, you know, why the South China Sea become very important. If you see in the 1990s and then the concern about the Japanese imperialism coming down, that the reason why the China from the continental, you know, power become very interested in, you know, the South China Sea with the southern border, and start, you know, sending the expeditionary mission to the Paracel in 1909. And so, I mean, different milestone where it would be better, because it's better that some kind of explanation for why, you know, the issue had become before, or maybe in the 1960s, 1970s, we see that the introductions of the UNCLOS system, the maritime order, legal order, that is very important. Why that explain, you know, how China becomes so interested in the features, barren and remote features over there. So I think the history part, though already very good, but it could be, you know, more enriched by further explanation, and we take into consideration of different factors that shape or influence the strategic calculus of each one different state in the region, especially in the China, that make two very bold moves in 1974 and 1988 using force to set up set their foot in the Paracel and Spratly. And we go to the second chapter, the China Claim Act. Actually, I like it very much in the way that is pointed out, you know, the natures of China claim and also the natures of activities. And also you also mentioned that, I mean, that China assertiveness maybe happened even before 2009. I think that it definitely happened elsewhere. But there's some issue that when you mention, I mean, that there's some part of the China narrative that have not been analyzed and also be deepened in the way, because in some part of that, especially in the picture 40 or 41, it talked about, you know, the cycle of action reaction, and China actually react to, you know, other state, you know, assertive actions as well. But I think it's not quite fair if we took into part, if we just look into from the cycle of action and reactions, because there's some issue. If you not mention about the law, the legal or lawful or lawful or unlawful, we don't talk about the legal boundary. So usually the China interpret every other country moves in the South China Sea as, you know, unlawful, and China respond with, you know, the bigger move. So basically for the whole period of time, we see that the China very actively promote, you know, the narrative of the action and reactions that, you know, try to blur the, actually it try to, how to avoid mentioning, you know, the legal boundary with degrading to the action of other country. So I think that would be a point also mentioned, that how the country view the dispute and one way or another, and how that conflict interview is not about the interest, it's not about just a real politics, but I think that is, I mean, the conflict has a disagreement playing down in the propaganda and also the information field, and how to shape the international public opinion on that. So I think we'll be very careful to cite the scholar also that rely on only the Chinese source. I think that also additional ASEAN member state also, other country also, they have their own view on the issue as well. So of course, you know, we'll just make it maybe more balanced on the way that to depict the situation. And of course, next point, I see it mentioned throughout, because you did a good mentioning about the option within UNCLOS about, you know, how to bring the issue to the third party and to the court. But I was mentioned throughout the book, you mentioned about the mistook between the PCA and also the arbitral court. So actually the two different things. The PCA, the Court of Arbitration, is also different for arbitral tribunal that established under the Annex 7 of the UNCLOS. So in the case of the Philippines, that is an Annex 7 arbitral court that will make a ruling. PCA also, you know, the desk that will provide the service to the tribunals. Particularly, there's some issue on Vietnam that I also want to, of course, the other part is very important, but also to focus on Vietnam. Some issue need to be, that maybe need further debate, especially, I mean, the Vietnam relation with Taiwan, that Vietnam want to use Taiwan as the bargaining chip to China. I, as a researcher on Vietnam policy, I haven't seen that way. I haven't seen that. I mean, usually, of course, we see the difference between China and Taiwan recently. We see that the Taiwan is gradually departing from the China position, especially with regarding to the law of the sea. But for quite a while, Taiwan and China claim are identical, so they're not much different on that. And also, you also quote the Chinese scholars on that, you know, that Vietnam have the, I mean, for example, at the page, I think 55 or 56, I mean, that also mentioned that Vietnam want to drop the legal cases. Yes, I think Vietnam have a lot of consideration on the legal case in the South China Sea, but of course it had not used that, but I haven't seen, you know, any declaration that it willing to renounce the rights. I mean, anytime Vietnam was said that Vietnam, the peaceful means is also, so including every peaceful means, I mean, peaceful mean in the Vietnamese perspective, mean also including the legal, I mean, the adjudication pathway as well. And for last but not least, I think it's very important with your conclusion. I think that I like it very much when they put, you know, how the issue gets stuck and how different country, how ASEAN, I mean, the code of conduct could not make, you know, could make the actual result on that. And also every country need to be consider the stability and peace as a priority. I think I agree on that, and on some part of that. But I think the at my observation is that the whole issue of the South China Sea, I think that China hold the key to resolve it or not. I mean, for example, of course, I think the sovereignty dispute is very difficult, but so much of the disputes of South China is about the law of the sea, the application of the law of the sea, its interpretation. Because the maritime zone can be, of course, it integral but also can be separate from the as well. So the 9-dash line and under the line of international law of UNCLOS, I think it's unlawful. So I mean, if China align their claims to the UNCLOS, I mean, to the universally accepted UNCLOS, and China as a party, it's not much problem about the South China Sea. Because we still have the sovereignty dispute to resolve. So, but of course, in that way, that could be different point of debate of further research. But I think that issue that, I mean, the legal law, the lawful, I mean, UNCLOS, the system is very important to the South China Sea dispute, and to understand that. And you look on the home period, we see that often the China is the key claimant that that can, the issue can resolve or can be stabilized. It much depends on China itself. So usually on the part, I would like to end my comments by congratulations on that, and appreciate the work on that, and definitely it's a contribution, valuable contribution to the scholarship on the South China Sea, and that could be helpful for students, for scholars to look into that, and very concise and very easy to read, very reader friendly work on that, and that would give anyone just read. Usually you have a thick book about South China Sea, but this one you discuss many things in a very not very extensive book. I think that would be valuable for the readers as well, to provide the pathway for understanding of that. And of course, with that limited space, so there's some kind of restraint on that, but would encourage you to look into further. There are also more issues into different country, domestic politics, and also other things that could make maybe the next book even more successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hai, for very useful comments, about the book and the subject and the coverage of the book. Quick reaction to his comments, Dr. Kipgen, particularly his concern about the level of depth you dealt with other claimant countries than China. Dr. Kipgen.
All right, thank you so much, Budhi, and also Dr. Hai for your insightful comments on the book. A few things. Yep, I agree on much of the points that you have stated, but there are a couple of things that I would like to respond. The first one, I definitely understand domestic politics or domestic issue plays a crucial role or important role in international relations with respect to the South China Sea dispute. But again, I think this book makes it different from other contributions, other books, in the sense that it tried to somehow concisely put together, a lot of issues into a small basket. And therefore, definitely I had missed out on the domestic side of its claimant states. I would have loved to do. In fact, if I were to focus on maybe just Vietnam's issue on the South China Sea dispute, I think I would have much more area or scope to discuss in depth, and would have to talk to people in Vietnam, including experts and policymakers, and perhaps even the common people. But definitely I understand your point. It's not just Vietnam, but even other countries as well. I do not do in-depth research and analysis on domestic policy, which definitely has a point to discuss about. And the second thing, definitely I agree, China is a big elephant in the room, and much of the issue lies on China, as you rightly pointed out, on how China wants to move forward. But the problem here is China, as the other, when we did the book launch, the moderator, our dean, was asking, Dr. Tigan, you are being very balanced and you do not criticize or you do not want to put any blame on any particular country. Is there any villain in the whole South China Sea dispute? I said, my job is, in the book, I do not want to put somebody as a villain. I would like to be more balanced and try to look at the different perspectives. And definitely, having said that, China is a big elephant in the room. It has more weightage, and of course, a lot of things can depend on how China takes the issue forward, including the COC. But at the same time, we also need to understand that ASEAN claimant states among themselves have different opinions or different claims in, when it comes to sovereignty claims. For example, look at between Philippines and Vietnam. Look at between all the claimant states within ASEAN or Southeast Asia. They are not having any bilateral agreement among themselves on how to move forward as a collective organization through ASEAN. So that also is something I deal with in the book very as much as possible. And this, the other thing that I would like to respond is definitely in the book, if you look at the arbitration part, I think I responded this one to Carl also. I very much explained the fact that it was not the PCA itself or that decided or that gave any verdict. It was our ad hoc tribunal established under Annex 7 of the UNCLOS. I very clearly pointed out that in the book. And again, we have to be clear on that as well. And finally, I would like to mention, again, respond to your point regarding Vietnam and Taiwan relations. I think we all know that, as I said in my response to Carl, I said Taiwan has been missed out in many books or in many literature because of the fact that Taiwan is not a sovereign state. But again, in this book, my focus was to also try to bring as one, legitimate and one important player in the whole South China Sea dispute. Therefore, no expert on the South China Sea would disagree with me the fact that when the Taiwan Strait relations, which means when the mainland China and Taiwan relations are better, which means Taiwan would be much more open in the support of whatever Beijing says. But when things are not so good in Taiwan, the cross-strait Taiwan relations, Taiwan somehow would like to be closer to ASEAN claimant states so that they can be friends. But again, the problem is that all the ASEAN claimant states do not recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state. Therefore, Taiwan's role in the whole issue is it's very limited. So again, if you have any specific question or point that you would like to respond to, I would love to. But again, I think out of those comments that you made, I appreciate them. And I think those responses are, I think, good for now. All right, thank you again, once again. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kipken. Our next speaker is from Philippines. Dr. Ramil C Banaloy. He's a professorial lecturer at the Department of International Studies, Miriam College of the Philippines. He was a professor of political science and international relations at the National Defense College of the Philippines. And then before that, assistant professor of international studies at De La Salle University, instructor in political science at the University of the Philippines, Los Banos, and the University Research Associate at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where he finished his BA and MA in political science. He took his PhD in political science also there. He obtained his PhD in international relations in Jinan University, Guangzhou, China. Dr. Banaloy is currently the president of Philippine Association for Chinese Studies and a member of the management board of the World Association of Chinese Studies. He also sits as a member of the board of directors of the China Southeast Asia Research Center on the South China Sea, a member of the International Panel of Experts of the Maritime Awareness Project of the National Bureau of Asian Research, and Sasakawa Peace Foundation, an adjunct research professor at the National Institute of South China Sea Studies, and a fellow at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. So we look forward to his comments, particularly Philippines' point of view on the dispute and as a scholar on the subject. Professor Banaloy.
Thank you very much, Budi. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm truly honored to be in the same panel with Dr. Carl Thayer because, Dr. Thayer played a vital role in my intellectual development in the South China Sea because I originally specialized on European studies, and he encouraged me to go back to Southeast Asian studies. He was my mentor while I was at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. But of course, all the failings of a scholar are solely mine. So I would like to commend, of course, my good friend, Dr. Nigim Pao, for publishing his book, The Politics of the South China Sea Dispute. There's no doubt that this book is adding value to the existing scholarly literature on the topic by focusing on the political dimension of the South China Sea Dispute, which is one of the major flashpoints of armed conflicts in Asia that can enormously affect the future directions of international peace and security. The publication of his book is very relevant and also very really timely, considering the current security tensions in the South China Sea involving the worsening rivalry of two great powers, China and the United States. So Dr. Nigim Pao's attempt to examine the political ramifications of the South China Sea disputes using the three major theories of international relations, namely realism, liberalism, and constructivism, exhibits the scholarly importance of his work to the epistemic community working on this field of study. This book, in fact, encourages me to publish my PhD dissertation on the topic written years ago, as I also applied the three major theories of international relations to explain the dynamics of conflict and cooperation in the South China Sea between the Philippines and China. And Dr. Nigim Pao's discussion on the ASEAN way to grapple with the politics of the South China Sea dispute is very significant to remind readers about the need to sustain our discussions on the centrality of ASEAN in the promotion of peace and stability, not only in the South China Sea, but more so in the wider Asia-Pacific region or Indo-Pacific region through the ASEAN Regional Forum and East Asia Summit discussed briefly in this book. What interests me most in this book is the chapter on the July 2016 Arbitral Tribunal, where the Philippines became the pivotal player. So I will give more time talking about this issue. Like most of the scholars covering this issue, Dr. Nigim Pao apparently accepts the view that the result of the International Arbitral Tribunal process is a ruling. Though this ruling overwhelmingly favors the position of the Philippines, and we are very thankful for that, it is worth asking from a scholarly standpoint on whether or not the judgment made by the tribunal was indeed a ruling or just a legal opinion or just a legal interpretation of the applicability of UNCLOS on China and Philippine maritime claims. If it is a ruling, does it really rule? And what and who really rules in the South China Sea? What if China rules the world? What will happen in the South China Sea? And so answering this question can be legal and political, but I'm getting the impression that Dr. Nigim Pao regards the issue as highly political. That's the title of his book. Arbitration is considered to be a model for an alternative dispute resolution, which can be voluntary or mandatory and binding or non-binding. But there's still a debate on whether the arbitration case of the Philippines against China is really mandatory and binding. Of course, from the Philippines' point of view, the arbitration is mandatory and legally binding, and we are jubilant with the result. But we know also that China is challenging this view, making the issue not merely legal, but largely political. And so I'm very happy to see Dr. Nigim Pao presenting both the Philippines and China's positions and responses on this issue. It is therefore worth reiterating his question on what should the international community do if China continues to ignore the so-called arbitral ruling. And in my own understanding of the issue, China will continue to ignore the result of the arbitration, as China does not regard the arbitration as such. China regards the decision of the International Arbitral Tribunal as one-sided, unilateral, and arbitrary, and therefore not truly an arbitration that has a legal and even moral bearing. China regards the decision of the tribunal as an imposition rather than a result of arbitration. And in my interpretation of China's position, this decision of the tribunal weaponizes UNCLOS against China. For the Philippines, UNCLOS is indeed a powerful weapon. In fact, we use UNCLOS as a powerful weapon to advance our maritime security interests in the South China Sea. And therefore, the Philippines supports and advances the principle of UNCLOS, and it also supports and advances Philippine sovereign rights in the South China Sea. UNCLOS, in fact, provides the strong legal foundation of the concept of the West Philippine Sea. The Philippines may not have enough frigates or corvette or offshore patrol vessels or even submarines to govern our sovereign rights in the South China Sea, but we know that we have UNCLOS on our side. This is the real political dilemma that the Philippines really faces. While the Philippines celebrates what we call our legal victory against China on the maritime issues in the South China Sea, the Philippines has yet to enjoy the political victory that should arise from it. That is why the Philippines is talking bilaterally with China on the South China Sea so we can get some political achievements out of our legal victory. The bilateral consultative mechanism on the South China Sea is the major bilateral platform where China and the Philippines discuss not only their political differences on the South China Sea, but also areas where the Philippines and China can cooperate in order to promote peace and friendship as well as prosperity in the South China Sea. The bilateral consultative mechanism offers other claimants exemplary models to consider in order to peacefully manage South China Sea disputes at the bilateral level. In fact, if climates can build a complex network of BCMs in the South China Sea, its regional use will be very promising and can yield a lot of gains if it can be the cornerstone of the emerging regional order in the South China Sea. So far, the Philippines and China held 5 meetings of the BCM, and they plan to hold 6 meetings before the end of this year. I have ongoing research on the BCM, or the Bilateral Consultative Mechanism, and I have already published short pieces about it based on the useful documents that we gathered and candid conversations with pertinent officials involved in the process. I can say that the 5th meeting made some breakthroughs as both parties started talking about the need to pursue joint marine scientific research, joint fishery management, and more importantly, joint development of natural resources, particularly on oil and natural gas. Dr. Ngim Pao, by virtue of unlimited time, fails to cover these breakthroughs as the timeline of his book project can only cover so much. But for the 6th meeting, I am proposing the inclusion of the following topics for bilateral discussions because of recent developments in the South China Sea. These topics are safety of navigation and communication in the South China Sea and crisis prevention and management in the South China Sea. You will notice that all these topics are areas of cooperation identified under the 2002 Declaration of the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. Thus, I can say that the bilateral consultative mechanism implements bilaterally the objectives of the DOC pending the conclusion of the COC, which I hope will occur by the end of 2021 as planned. Now, let's go back to the question. What should the international community do if China continues to ignore the so-called arbitral ruling? One can provide legal answers to this question. But realities on the ground tell us that major powers, particularly the United States, are already answering this question politically and militarily by conducting military activities in the South China Sea in the form of freedom of navigation operations and joint military exercises in order to pressure China to abide by the decision of the tribunal. Thus, his chapter on the role of the US and others is very timely and useful for scholars and policymakers covering this topic. Dr. Ngim Pao asked, should the US play a more active role? But my question is, just what do we mean by a more and what do we mean by active? How much is more and how active is active? Well, we can discuss this further later if we have ample time. But I observed that while Dr. Ngim Pao gives some pertinent discussions on the role of India, Japan, and Australia on the South China Sea dispute, I wonder why the role of Russia and even the European Union, particularly France, is not covered. Well, that's all for now because we don't have enough time to discuss these matters. But let me just conclude that the South China Sea disputes will not be resolved without the full cooperation of China. Thus, there is a need to further engage rather than isolate or provoke China if we want peace to prevail in the South China Sea. On the other hand, we need China and also other players to behave more responsibly and constructively in order to promote stability and security in the South China Sea. That's all I can say at this moment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Banaloy, for very useful comments and, highlighting perspectives, of legal perspectives rather to resolve the issues and, the attitude of, international community vis-a-vis China's policy. Dr. Kipgen, quick comments?
All right, a couple of comments. The first thing, let me begin by saying my conversation with Robert Beckman. I think Kari is aware of him. I think any one of us who are on this panel should know who is Robert Beckman. He's a legal scholar on the South, focusing on the South China Sea. When I interviewed him, when I met him in Singapore, he said, Dr. Kipgen, you political scientists are very much serious about or concerned about whether what is it, a code of conduct is or DOC or COC is legally binding or not. But for us legal scholars, that's what he said. For us legal scholars, it doesn't really quite matter because at the end of the day, if party to this, or let's say if major powers are reluctant to let's say implement or let's say agree to the ruling or the agreement, what does it make a difference? So I think I would like to bring that into the picture here. Definitely, UNCLOS is very important with regard to the South China Sea dispute, especially this is important for Philippines, which brought up the issue at The Hague. But again, what happens is that China, when major powers such as China, let's say if America comes into the picture, it will be the same thing. When major powers are not agreeing to accept the verdict or let's say the ruling of these arbiters, let's say arbitration court, whatever we may call for now, see, it is very difficult to enforce them. I think I have absolutely clearly discussed about this, the complexity, why it's not possible when major powers are, let's say, reluctant to implement such ruling. In fact, this is not just for the South China Sea dispute, it is for the whole international system. So starting with the UN system where we have the P5, when P5 don't agree each other, when they don't see face to face, eye to eye, things do not go forward. I think this is there is a bigger picture behind. I think somewhere in the book I briefly discuss about this as well. And definitely I agree again with Hai and also with Banaloy that China has a huge stake and huge voice and weightage with regard to the future of the South China Sea dispute. Then coming to why not included Russia and European Union, definitely I think if you study very closely, I included the viewpoint of the European Union. Of course, I talked to one of the officers based in Indonesia, Jakarta, and his viewpoint is also somewhere mentioned in the book. But again, I'm not going to the specifics of some countries in Europe. For example, France is definitely not included because I was trying to look at the bigger picture of the European Union. And of course, I did not include Russia for different reasons because my focus was more on some of the important players. And of course, China, South Russia, if you watch very closely, of course, I am not completely ruling out that Russia is not having any interest in the region or South China Sea for that matter. But again, I see Russia as an outlier in the whole South China Sea dispute when you compare with the Quad members, especially this America and Australia, Japan, and India. I think I see and I still believe that Russia is an outlier. Of course, that doesn't mean that Russia has no interest and it doesn't play any role at all. But again, I was not trying to focus on the outlier players. And of course, if the book was to be written in maybe 300 pages or so, I could have covered other areas and other countries more. But again, that was out of my scope area in my research. I think that should be enough. If there's anything that I missed, we can catch up later. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Dr. Kipgen. And our last speaker is Dr. Jagannath P. Panda. He is a research fellow and center coordinator for East Asia at Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. He is also a series editor for Routledge Studies on Think Asia. Dr. Panda is an expert on China and India-Pacific security with a prime focus on East Asia, China, Japan, and Korean Peninsula. He is the author of the book India-China Relations, Politics of Resources, Identity and Authorities in Multipolar World Order, published in 2017. He is the author of the book China's Path to Power, Party, Military, and the Politics of State Transition, published in 2010. He has also edited many books to his credit. Most recently, he has published an edited volume, Scaling India-Japan Cooperation in India-Pacific and Beyond, 2025. We look forward to his views, particularly the strategic, importance of this dispute to India, particularly in light of the recent border skirmishes with China. I invite Dr. Panda for his comments on the book and the subject.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. Let me start by complimenting my friend Negin Pao for this book. The book is well received by me as a reader, as a scholar, and as a non-expert on the South China Sea dispute. Now, that's how I will look at the book. And also somebody who is really working closely with Routledge. I will also compliment Routledge for bringing out such a book. I have been working with the London and New York office under the Routledge Studies and Think Asia series. But then again, as a student of South China Sea politics, if I want to learn something, I would ask that fundamental question that why do we publish books on such kind of topics? Primarily because we want to learn, we want to take the debate ahead, and we want to disseminate that knowledge to the public, to the students for the next generation. And therefore, I think there, Dr. Negin Pao has done a commendable job in terms of bringing out a volume which will be relevant for the next couple of decades, if not more. One of the key highlight of this book is that this is a well-written, very simple drafted book. And it gives me an impression that a layman, a reader, a student, when he or she goes through the book, he tries to understand the nitty-gritties of the South China Sea and also comes out with more questions. And that's what I am going to do. So my comments, my judgments on the books, which has already been published, is more in terms of compliments, less in terms of comment, less in terms of comments and criticism, more in terms of compliments, as it generates debates and discussions. So I would compliment again Negin Pao for publishing this book. Now let me begin with the title. The title itself explains the whole narrative of the book. The title is about politics of the South China Sea dispute. Now that's very interesting in the sense that we know that there is a dispute, but what the author is trying to say is that there is also a politics involved in that dispute. And I think that's the distinction of this book, which needs to be really talked about. And therefore I would not only draw the attention of the readers, but also the forums, the scholars who are sitting in this forum to discuss the book at some stage to look at in their research if it has already not been carried out in some other form. One is that when we are talking about dispute, of course we are talking about the dispute among the claimant members. But when we are talking about politics, we are talking about the political platform of the dispute. And therefore, the politics to me here combines both the claimant and non-claimant states. And I think that's one of the key highlights of this book. What really interested me to read is that when the author talked about role of the US and others. And I think that's for me one of the most interesting chapter because the things are actually evolving there. The dispute is stuck. The non-disputed part is actually evolving gradually. And there we need to really talk about the South China Sea dispute over the next 1 or 2 decades. Now, once goes to if I comes to the structure is actually gives an impression that you get to know the history of the South China Sea from this book. Then you have a clear outline of what is the major claimant states' position on the dispute, the Chinese position, and also the arbitral tribunal's judgment, and then the non-claimant's view. But my reservation with the author here is, and therefore I would request Nguyen Pao to probably revisit his thesis while the second edition of the book will be planned, is that maybe to expand the non-claimant perspective much more, in a clear and in a much more lucid manner. Why do I say this? I think, as I mentioned, the whole key to this book is the title. It talks about the politics of the disputes. It's not really talking about the disputes. So dispute is just one aspect. When we're talking about the politics of the disputes, we need to be really talking about what really constitute those politics. And I think that is one aspect in which is missing at the introductory chapter, and also needs to be really elaborated in the book a little more. Now, when I'm saying and emphasizing time and again that the politics of the South China Sea dispute needs to be emphasized, I think there are one key factor as a non-expert reader, as a layman reader, I would be searching in the book is the scenarios. How the scenarios regarding the disputes is going to emerge from now on. And I think there are 2-3 scenarios which the author could actually think of examining when he's coming out with the second edition of the book. One is that there is a lot of debate is going on about the non-claimant states. He has actually covered about the role of the US, role of the Japan, role of India, the Indian perspective, but he's not really talking about how there is a knowingly or unknowingly a broader understanding is evolving among the non-claimant states. And I think that is one of the key factors. The Japanese are taking forward these debates to some extent. The Americans, through their latest position paper, what Mike Pompeo has released, 3 to 4 weeks back, they are taking ahead of this debate. India, even though we are much more cautious, even though we are much more careful in talking about South China Sea, we are definitely trying to be on the game in some form. So I think what we need to really talk about, one of the scenario we need to talk about is that, is there a prospects of a emerging coalition among the non-claimant states in the South China Sea dispute? Are the non-claimant states are going to really come out together to form a coalition at some form? And what are the prospects of this coalition? And I think we should not really be ruling out this coalition primarily because each of the major non-claimant states, be it the US, be it Japan, be it Australia, be it India, each one of these actors are having several stakes, and not only commercial stakes, not only commercial interests, a number of stakes and claims in South China Sea. Claims not in terms of maritime dominance or maritime land dominance, territorial dominance, but more in terms of commercial claims, more in terms of claims in order to preserve the rule of law and play a critical part into that. The second scenario, what we really need to talk about in this book, probably the author could think about expanding, is that the legality of the dispute and the non-legality of the dispute. How that scenario is going to evolve. Maybe the second edition of this book could be really covered about that, whether the legality of the dispute and the non-legality of the dispute are two separate things or they are complementary to each other. And under what circumstances this scenario would evolve, and what role does it really leave it for the Quad countries, US, Japan, Australia, India, and also other non-claimant countries who are having some kind of a view or perspective towards the South China Sea. The third is, and I think this is another critical aspect, is that the book talks about the dispute, but what is the future of this dispute? The future of this dispute is not really necessarily going to be, limiting to the claimant countries itself. The disputes might really pan out further. the dispute might go further to the non-claimant states. As the claimant Southeast Asian countries are supported by non-claimant major powers like US, Japan to some extent Australia. So how this dispute is going to evolve, that is the third scenario the author could really discuss in the work. Now, these are the scenario part which the author could think about in terms of expanding the latter part of the book. I have some comments about chapter 3 and chapter 4. The chapter 3 about the claimant states and the ASEAN's challenges. I mean, we do get an impression from the book that what kind of position and what kind of perspective Taiwan, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, they hold towards each other. But it needs to be really seen that how much after the code of conduct is coming out, and let's hope it comes out sooner or later. Let's hope that it comes out sooner than later. But no matter whenever it's coming out, to what extent these claimant countries are going to compromise in their position or revisit their claimant position, that needs to be really examined in this book. Because we are talking about the dispute, we are talking about the claimant country's position. So how are this position really something permanent? Are this position really going to really change over time once the COC really comes out? Whether the Chinese are going to really show any flexibility once the COC are, I would agree with Dr. Thor Tan Hai that for China, and I think the COC is more of an art of trying to build a exclusionary kind of a situation in the South China Sea. So therefore, it would be critical to see by the author whether the other claimant states, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, all of these countries, do they really will hold to the same old position once the COC comes out? So that is one aspect that the chapter 3 could really examine. Then I would come into the chapter 4, which is about July 26 arbitral tribunal decisions. Now, this is again a very well-written chapter, my compliments. But I think I would slightly differ with the author and probably disagree with his assessment when he's posing actually a question, shift of strategy under President Duterte. But he's not really examining whether this is a shift, this is a transition, or this is a mild change in perspective. So there are three things I think the author needs to really clarify. It is not necessarily a change in position. Probably it's a change in approaching China, and it's a change in managing China with regard to the dispute. And I think there Duterte has a point. Even though many experts around the world, they have called the Filipino president as a pro-China hand, but look at his position today. I think he is revisiting on most of the China-related issues, day by day. And I think I would request Nguyen Pao to probably revisit these questions and try to find answers to these questions in a much more scholarly manner. That whether there is a transition, there is a shift, or there is a change in perspective with regard to Philippines' approach towards the post-South China Sea vis-a-vis China. My last point, and I think this is a critical point here, is that I think the Indian perspective about the South China Sea. And I think I would encourage, as Nguyen Pao belongs to India and it is written by an Indian scholar, it makes sense to have an exclusive chapter on India. So maybe in the second edition, he can develop this as a exclusive chapter on India's perspective on South China Sea, following the non-claimant states chapter. Now there, interestingly, in the non-claimant states chapter, he has talked about three things, and I completely agree with him. It's a very well-written short chapter. He has talked about geopolitics, he has talked about geostrategy, he has talked about geoeconomics. So I think that explains that what is going to be India's future prospects with regard to South China Sea. I recently published a piece in the Strait Times in Singapore. Will India really revisit its position on South China Sea? And it is easily available in my Twitter account and in the internet. You can read that piece. And I think we need to really see India's position, if not really changing, position really being aligned with a non-Chinese club of interest. And therefore, and I think India down to earth, let's say 10 years from now on, given its rising economic forte, if Indian economy is really rising, India might take a call on the South China Sea. So far, what India has been doing is that we have played a neutral position by saying that, we don't really interfere or want to interfere because we are a non-claimant countries. We want the dispute should be resolved among the claimant countries peacefully. It should be there should be legal means to resolve the dispute. Freedom of navigation should be maintained. Independent lawful commerce should be maintained. And South China Sea is a global commerce. So these are the broad lines where India has maintained position. But I think it will be really critical to see that whether India would really revisit its position in South China Sea or not. My position here would be, and my take here would be, I might be wrong. As I work on India-China relations and I work on China, I would say that India-China relation is going to be one of the defining aspects to South China Sea dispute in coming time. Probably India might not really find it viable to revisit its position on one China policy, because one China policy is a dire complicated issue. It's a much complicated issue, and I don't think India is really competent to take a position on one China policy unless there is a change in the US unless there is a change in the US position, unless there is a change in many other non-China friendly countries that they hold and recognize Taiwan as a separate country or a separate entity from China, and they de-recognize the one China policy or one China principle. But I think what is critical from India's point here is that there is a chance India might revisit its position on South China Sea if China continues to claim on India's territory on the land border, in the India-China border regions, including on Tawang and Arunachal Pradesh. I had written an issue brief, I think 3 or 4 years back, in my institute's website, comparing how the Chinese have actually seen the China-Pakistan economic corridor and India's claim in the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, but they have not really taken India's oil exploration with Vietnam in the South China Sea zone. And I think that could be the triggering point in future. India's rising commercial interest, oil exploration interest in South China Sea is rising. The naval capability of India is rising. There is a rising chemistry happening between India and Vietnam, between India and Australia, between India and Japan, between India and US. So if we are moving towards a contested South China Sea regions and contested scenario, and if the tensions between India and China is intensifying and China forget to respect and appreciate India's sovereignty on many of the issues on land border in its dispute with India, India might be forced to revisit its position on South China Sea. I will stop here and welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Panda, for very useful comments and giving a non-claimant country's perspective and the dispute and some suggestions for Dr. Kipgan for the next edition. Dr. Kipgan, 2 comments.
All right. Thank you so much. Again, there were a lot of comments, Panda. I did not believe that you could have brought up so many comments, but again, I appreciate it. Let me try to answer in 3 points. The first one, I don't know what other scholars would say, but as a political scientist, I agree that there is interplay between politics and law when it comes to the South China Sea dispute. Of course, as a political scientist, I focus more on the political side, the political aspect of the dispute, but also I cannot absolutely, let's say, go away from talking about the legal aspect. Therefore, I put that into some portion of my argument or my discussion. But again, the focus is a political aspect, but definitely there is a legal aspect, which is also very critical, very important. There are a lot of books, a lot of literatures out there looking at specifically on the legal aspect, and I'm not going to talk much about. Definitely, there is interplay between politics and law when it comes to the South China Sea. You cannot throw one away and take another in. You will always have to look at the two dimensions when you look at the South China Sea dispute. Number two, the Duterte. I think Romel is the right person to respond. But again, based on my understanding and research, I think you use three different words: change, shift, or transition. I think all of the three might have some, let's say, variation of relevance on the policy change from the previous administration to this Duterte. Definitely, one of the main reasons why Duterte seemingly, I mean, it's a question of debate again, whether it's going to be for a permanent or for a long time, or as long as he's in power, or just for a temporary one, is, I mean, yet to be proven. But again, we see different things. I mean, like Trump, Duterte is more or less unpredictable in many ways. But you can see that definitely there is a purely economic reason. This is one most important why Duterte, I mean, he never said he is completely abandoning the arbitration ruling as such. He said it is not now. It's not a time to emphasize on this ruling that would strain. In fact, if you look at the historical development, right after the arbitral ruling, China cut off ties with Philippines. Then when Duterte came to power, he tried to restore that, and by not emphasizing on the arbitral ruling, rather than focusing on the bilateral ties, economic relations, by trying to achieve investment from China, infrastructure development, of course, the fight against drug and extremism was also another factor when America seemingly stepped away from, or even Obama criticized the drug war or drug campaign on launched by Duterte. It was China who came forward, say that we would support you instead of criticizing. I mean, there were some other issues which I mentioned in the book, which somehow changed the perception of Duterte. But again, I don't necessarily believe that this would be a long-lasting, a permanent shift or a transition of Philippines in the years and centuries to come. I mean, that's not the argument that I make. I think if you look deeper into the book, I studied those things. Why is Duterte seemingly shifting or changing or transitioning its policy on the South China Sea with respect to China? And the last thing that you talk about, India, of course, that's a good point. I would have loved to put India as one chapter, but unfortunately, India is not an active claimant. Therefore, I cannot afford to give one whole chapter for China. In fact, I'm now planning to write my next book, my fifth book on international relations of Southeast Asia, where I'm planning to put India as one exclusive chapter, and hopefully you would like that chapter if and when it comes out. But again, definitely, a few months ago, not very long, maybe a couple of months ago, I published one article in India Quarterly, published by Routledge from London. I look at India-ASEAN relations from a security perspective, economy, and also from people-to-people ties. Then I look at, among many others, my argument was that India is seen to be unreliable security partner by ASEAN member states, especially the ASEAN claimant states in the South China Sea dispute. I mean, I think you have rightly pointed out some of the reasons why India has not been vocal on the South China Sea. Of course, one main reason is its bilateral ties with China. Definitely is. India is vocal on the South China Sea dispute. China is going to come closer in the Indian Ocean, Andaman and Nicobar Island. I think India quite well understands this possible consequences. But again, given the fact recent developments in the border dispute, I think India, as you said, I believe, may revisit, but I don't know how, up to what extent it might be, may in the future may revisit its position on the South China Sea. But until then, this is important, until then, ASEAN claimant states would continue to view India as unreliable security partner when it comes to the South China Sea dispute. Thank you very much.
Can I request one thing? I have another meeting, so you have to release me in 2 minutes. If there is any questions, otherwise I'll request you to release me. I have another meeting.
Okay, thank you. So I think I was planning to give a chance to put forward your closing remarks on other panelists. So I think you have first chance, Dr. Panda.
Thank you very much. It's a very good book, and I compliment the author. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, that what do we write a book? We don't write the book always for the specialist. We always write a book to be placing it for the library, for the next generation, for the students, to disseminate the knowledge in the public. And I think there, the author, Dr. Nguyen Pao, has done a commendable job, and my compliments to him. And this will stay relevant for at least for a couple of decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Panda, for taking out time for this book.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll take you.
Dr. Carl, would you like to say something about other panelists' point of view?
Yes, I would. And I've got 3 points that I would like to, I was going to try to share something on the screen, but I'll just put it up on mine. To answer Ramil Banaloy's, whether the arbitral tribunal had a ruling, opinion, or application, it's in fact an award. And under Annex 7, Article 11, what I would put up as a direct quote, the award of this tribunal shall be final and without appeal, unless the parties to the dispute have agreed in advance to an appellate procedure. It shall be complied with by the parties to the dispute. So that's a legal undertaking that China has chosen to ignore. My second point is in response to Nguyen Pao's quoting Bob Beckman, that political scientists want, fascinated with legally binding things, and it doesn't make a difference. Well, if a major power decides to ignore it. But I would just say, one, if it causes reputational damage, and now there's a ganging up of China on backing the UNCLOS and the award. And second, it provides a legal basis for third parties. Now, the US can't because it's not a party to UNCLOS. But in certain activities, if an Australia got involved and China interfered, then China could take additional legal action. But what I was getting at is if Duterte, let's say, had been a loyal ally to the United States and called for help in asserting the right, legal rights rather than putting it aside, that could have changed the ballgame, and it still could. In other words, the US and outside powers, Australia, really can't act unless the claimant state involved leads the way. And by having a legal decision, it provides that legal cover. It won't go to the UN Security Council. And the third, Dr. Panda has left, but when he was talking about the code of conduct, he may not know, but he's not here. It doesn't. It states quite clearly in the single draft negotiating text, right up the front in the first section, that this is quoting from UNCLOS itself, it cannot decide sovereignty disputes. So let's not get too excited. I mean, it cannot decide sovereignty disputes. It will not decide on a maritime delimitation. Two states have overlapping zones. The tribunal can't get involved. And finally, military activities. And Ramil will know that his country beached a LST on a reef in 1999 and kept it commissioned in the Philippines. It's on Thomas Shoal, and asked the tribunal to rule on Thomas Shoal, and the tribunal declined because it was a military activity. All that UNCLOS can do is resolve disputes over the application of UNCLOS or its interpretation. Now, the code of conduct, and without getting into too many, 9 countries contributed to, Laos and Myanmar didn't. The vast corpus of that code of conduct is easily tidied up, and it has many wonderful suggestions through it to prevent disputes and to resolve them, etc. It's the areas I highlighted earlier, and I'll leave it on that. The legal nature means, is it enforceable? Is it going to be a treaty? The area that it concerns, because I talk about the absurdity of sailing out of the Spratlys, and where you have to behave under a code of conduct, and as soon as you get outside, you don't. And the role of third parties to help the more weaker ASEAN states support their legal positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carl. Dr. Thor Tan Hai, closing remarks.
I think it's very interesting comments in the book, and I just think that we have the ongoing story. I just mentioned that there should be update because there's some, I think, even assertion on the book that already outdated because we see the series of notes of both sent to United Nations, nations, and you think that Malaysia is also quite assertive on asserting Philippines as well, and we also see the US is more vocal, so Australia as well, and Professor Kang Thayer who know even more about it, and we show that I think the effect of the triple ruling will be long lasting, and we'll see that I will see that there's a more conversion on the part of the claimants of other country speaking out against any type of activities that against that. So I think that is also shifting as well. The South China Sea is more complex and evolving the issue, and definitely is worth more research on that. I would love to see the new book, update on the recent battle and also how the Indian and how US, Australia also take into the legal warfare and with other countries as well. I think that should be an update on that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hai. And finally, Dr. Ramil, final comments, remarks?
I think Budhi has left for another meeting.
Okay, so thank you so much. We have a couple of questions before we close. I think we are running out of time also. So I think if there 2 people have raised their hands, so I'll give them the first chance to speak. Would you like to ask a question, Mr. Chauhan? Tomal Khan Chauhan? Is he audible? I think
the audience would not be.
Okay, I think they have been muted. So, okay, so we have only recorded questions. Actually, this is only one question. And this is about the defense spending by the claimant countries in response to China's stand, to address the, or to counter China's policy in South China Sea. So anyone who would like to say something about defense spending of the claimant countries?
Yeah, I'll just make a very broad one.
Yeah.
This pre-COVID and after COVID, everybody's cutting defense spending right now. That's absolutely clear. If you took SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, and you went back a year and then did the 5 years under that, Vietnam at one point was the 10th largest importer of weapons in the world. And it dropped from 8th position. So yes, they've been modernizing their naval and air forces. The Philippines, even under Duterte, has been modernizing their forces. There has been in Indonesia and Malaysia, but and that's a long time frame, not just immediately. The answer is after COVID, everybody has had to reduce defense expenditures.
If I may just add one point, Budhi, and the question and others, it is only Brunei which does not maintain a permanent let's say, armed post in the South China Sea dispute. So all other claimant states, even if they do not publicly announce or publicly make available, definitely they are always prepared and they would continue to increase. Of course, the pandemic has changed a lot of things right now, but definitely in the long run, they would increase their defense spending with regard to the South China Sea dispute.
So thank you so much.
We have some questions, sir. I think we have some questions.
I think there was only one question, Sanjay, which you answered about defense standing. Okay.
I have noted some. One question is: do you think the sovereign countries can resolve their issue by ICJ? ICJ can resolve this issue.
Yeah. Anyone who can.
Anyone can take.
I've turned my mic on. The International Court of Justice is one of four mechanisms in an UNCLOS. The International Tribunal Law, the Sea, the Arbitral Tribunal, and Special Arbitral Tribunal. My understanding, it takes the consent of both parties to go there. So you make a complaint and China doesn't want to go, it doesn't happen. If you sign on to UNCLOS and do not specify which of the four mechanisms you want, which was the case between China and the Philippines, it makes it quite explicit that the arbitral tribunal is the default case. And it also makes provision that if one of the parties refuses to participate, the judges on that tribunal are not to draw any conclusions and are to do their best to see that China's arguments are represented, which was the case with the Philippines.
And I would like to add on to it. So I would like to ask the questioner to please read the book. Definitely, I mentioned that. One of the reasons why they did not go to ICJ was, as rightly pointed out by Carl, both parties have to agree to the case or to the proceeding. In this case, China didn't. Therefore, it was not possible. So there are more discussion about the issue in the book. So I would highly encourage the questioner to read the book itself. Thank you.
One question I want to ask you, anyone can answer it. China is very aggressive, you know, with the border dispute with India also, and in South China Sea also. So this is a well thought strategy to divert the attention of Wuhan corona or Chinese virus to other, diverting the attentions of the international communities. Now, no one is talking about the Wuhan or the even US president is not talking about the Chinese virus. And there is an arm race also due to this. So this is a well thought strategy from the Chinese part.
I'm going to jump in quickly and say, no, I don't agree with that argument for the following. I make it worse. It's business as usual. And if you take pre and post COVID, just to make two simple cases, China sunk fishing boats in both before COVID and after COVID. And China began harassing oil exploration in countries before and after COVID. And China sent survey ships into Vietnam and the Malaysian waters before and after. No, it's China, okay, not taking advantage, it's doing business as usual, but these states are now weakened. So they're less likely to be able to respond. They've got to first give priority to developments at home. And that may have led, among other things, Vietnam to cease oil exploration, breaking contracts with foreign companies. And according to Bill Hayton, losing $1 billion in fees because in areas that China was pressuring them.
Yeah, I also discussed in this book, I think China has been doing delaying tactics. In other words, Islamic slicing policy in the South China Sea. And of course, this is a good time for China, especially the fact that many countries are now much more focused. They're more, let's say first priority becomes addressing the pandemic. And China definitely continues to, as Carl said, continue to do what it has done. It's a slow and steady, and it's a delaying tactic at the same time, a salami slicing, which it continues to do from before and after the pandemic. Yes.
Hello, may I audible? Now we like to invite Mr. Akash from Routledge. And the one thing is common, what I have noted by the bios shared by the Dr. Nigan Pao, that all the speakers has chosen the publisher partner as a Routledge. So that is proud moment for you, Mr. Akash.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much. Hello everyone. I'm Akash, part of the editorial team at Routledge, Taylor and Francis. Thank you for making time for a very important book, The Politics of South China Sea Disputes by Nehin Pao Kipkin. It's his second book with us. And on behalf of Routledge, Taylor and Francis, I take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks for all of those who have made this possible. Professor Carlisle Thayer from the University of New South Wales, Dr. Thor Tan Hai from the Embassy of Vietnam in India, Professor Banaloy from Miriam College in the Philippines, Dr. Jagannath Panda from the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi, Mr. B.P. Chauhan, Director of the Global Library at Jindal Global University. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your thoughts and for a wonderful and insightful discussion. And thank you, Nehenpa, for coming up with this wonderful book that is as much a story of the region as a signifier of the state of world politics. And dear listeners, thank you so much for making this possible. It's great that all of you could join in what seems to be like the new normal. At Taylor and Francis, we are pleased to publish this volume, which is of which has global ramifications. The book only reflects the time-honored tradition at Routledge, Taylor and Francis of publishing works that make a difference. As the world's leading publishers, we publish more than 2,600 journals and over 5,500 books each year, with a books backlist that exceeds over 120,000 specialist titles in 40 subject categories. Our content spans all areas of the humanities, the social sciences, the behavioral sciences, science and technology, and medicine. And we have published in a range of formats, which include monographs, edited volumes, handbooks, and reports. A part of this is the Routledge India Originals program. The Routledge India Originals program extends the Routledge tradition of excellence through academic publishing in the social sciences and the humanities to India and South Asia. And we publish for a global audience. So in the last 15 years, Routledge India Originals has published extensively in these areas with over 20 book series that engage with issues that are relevant to the subcontinent in an unusual and interdisciplinary manner. This book is a testimony to our strong roots and commitment to the larger academic community and society in general. I take this opportunity to thank the panelists once again, the author and the esteemed guests for taking time out to attend this, this book launch. Last but not least, I also take this opportunity to thank Mr. Sanjay Jha of the Global Library at Jindal Global University for organizing this event, and my colleagues at Routledge, Taylor and Francis for making this book possible. Thank you so much.
We are also grateful to all the participants who have taken time out and participated in this. And if anyone have any question, they can mail us. We will get the answer from the knowledgeable speakers and forward that answer to you. So thank you so much for joining.
You have to turn on the microphone.
Yeah.
Can I audible?
Yes, you are audible. I think.
Yes. One thing I want to mention that that I got the information. I also received some mails regarding the panel chosen by the author itself. So everyone is saying that this panel is too good, and we got the acknowledgement from different sources. Okay, thank you so much, and we may meet in the campus sometime when everything will be normal. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Kipgen, you're not audible. You need to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I am saying that you, Dr. Kipgen, can invite some of the speakers. We
yourself.
already get some mail acknowledging you have chosen the best speakers
All right.
on the subject. So
Yeah. Thank you very much again, Carl. It's late in the afternoon there, but again, hi, and also Romel and Jagannath. See, definitely, it's a fantastic panel, and I would love to see you in person. I mean, hopefully, when things come better. And I like to remind, I mean, Sanjay would have said in the beginning, but this video is recorded and it would be out in YouTube video, maybe very shortly from now. So please share with your colleagues, your friends, and then they can listen to. And again, thank you very much, Akash. This has been, again, second time publishing with him. I mean, he is the editor of my book, the first one and this second one. I really enjoyed throughout the, the process from editing to questions and others. Everything has been excellent. And I encourage listeners and others to work with Akash and Routledge to publish their academic books in the future. Thank you very much for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hope I have a chance to visit the campus.
Please,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
please.
That's what I am. So we have the chance to meet and can discuss something. Okay, we have a very good campus. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, to more cooperation with the university.
Yes.
Yeah, I heard that for quite a while.
And we would love to invite Carl also to visit our campus in the future, if you can.
Khan, you're welcome here in India.
Yeah, right.
In Haryana, right?
It's Delhi NCR. It's just outside of Delhi.
NCR, yes.
Yeah.
It's
I
very close.
never got out of Delhi.
Mm.
And what you may not know is my wife's family comes from Gujarat. So.
Oh, Gujarat. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Final.
You too, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.